Julian Croft did not frequent places like this. The air in the sprawling superstore was a stale composite of popcorn, cheap plastic, and a faint, cloying sweetness from the bakery department. It was an assault on his curated senses, a world away from the ionized air of his penthouse and the supple leather of his chauffeured sedan. He was here for a single, absurd item, a specific brand of imported Swiss water that his nutritionist insisted was molecularly superior. As he navigated the wide, brightly lit aisles, his tailored suit a stark anomaly amongst the casual disarray of the other shoppers, his gaze fell upon a man in the baby care section. The man, Leo, looked like a man drowning in slow motion. He stood before a wall of diapers, his shoulders slumped with a weariness that seemed to seep into the very marrow of his bones. He held a single, small pack in one hand and a collection of crumpled bills and coins in the other. He counted the change, his lips moving silently, his brow furrowed in a desperate calculation that was painful to witness. Julian watched for a moment, a flicker of something cold and analytical passing through him. He saw not a person, but a problem, a life of poor choices culminating in this pathetic tableau under the fluorescent glare of aisle 12. This, Julian thought with a familiar, detached cynicism, was the consequence of a life mismanaged. He was about to turn away, to continue his quest for overpriced water and leave the man to his quiet desperation, but something held him. It was a story about to unfold, a tale of two men from opposite ends of existence, whose lives were about to collide over a simple box of diapers. It was a story that would prove how the greatest value is often hidden in the most humble of packages, and how a single act of charity, born of pity, could blossom into a partnership that would reshape an entire industry. Leo Vance was 32 years old, though the exhaustion etched around his eyes made him appear a decade older. His world had shrunk to the four walls of a small, one-bedroom apartment in the city's forgotten West End. It was a space defined not by what it had, but by what it lacked: no expensive furniture, no modern appliances, no art on the walls. Yet, it was impeccably clean. The worn floorboards were scrubbed, the few second-hand books were neatly stacked, and the air, unlike the superstore, smelled of gentle baby soap and warm milk. This tiny apartment was his fortress, his sanctuary, and his entire universe, because it contained Lily. His daughter, just 10 months old, was the sun around which his broken world revolved. Her gurgling laugh was the only music he needed, her tiny, trusting hand gripping his finger the only affirmation he sought. He cared for her with a meticulous, almost reverent devotion. He sterilized her bottles with boiling water on the stove, he mashed her food by hand, and he spent hours building elaborate structures for her out of discarded cardboard boxes he found behind the grocery store. These were not toys, they were castles and rocket ships, each one a testament to a father's boundless love built from the scraps of a life in ruins. 5 years ago, Leo had been a different man. He had been Dr. Leo Vance, the wunderkind of software architecture, the lead designer of a revolutionary data processing algorithm for a tech giant called Omnicorp. He had a brilliant mind, capable of seeing the elegant, invisible structures that underpinned the digital world. His code was not just functional, it was poetry, a symphony of logic that ran with breathtaking efficiency. He had a corner office, a six-figure salary, and a future that seemed limitless. He also had a wife, Elena, whose smile was as bright as his future. But his mind, so attuned to logic and order, was also fiercely committed to a rigid ethical code. When he discovered that Omnicorp was using his algorithm to secretly harvest and sell the personal data of millions of users to predatory lenders, he did not hesitate. He gathered the evidence, confronted his superiors, and when they tried to bury it, he blew the whistle. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Omnicorp's powerful chief executive, a man with connections in every corner of the industry, didn't just fire Leo, he erased him. Leo was sued into bankruptcy, his professional reputation systematically dismantled through a vicious smear campaign. He was labeled unstable, a disgruntled employee, a fabulist. He was blacklisted, his name a poison pill in any job application. The industry that had once celebrated him now slammed every door in his face. Then, the ultimate tragedy struck. Elena, weakened by a difficult pregnancy, succumbed to a postpartum infection just weeks after Lily was born. In the span of a year, Leo had lost his career, his fortune, his wife, and his name. All he had left was his daughter and the unyielding integrity that had cost him everything. Julian Croft, at 45, commanded a world as vast as Leo's was small. His company, Croft Innovations, was a titan in the logistics and supply chain industry, a testament to his relentless drive and sharp, unforgiving intellect. He lived in a glass-walled penthouse that overlooked the city like a modern-day Olympus, its minimalist decor and cold, hard surfaces a reflection of the man who resided there. The rooms were silent, sterile spaces, populated by museum-quality art he rarely looked at and smart home technology that catered to his every need without the messy inconvenience of human interaction. Success had brought him immense wealth and power, but it had left him profoundly isolated. Julian's life had been forged in the crucible of betrayal. He had built his first company with his best friend from college, only to be forced out in a hostile takeover orchestrated by that same friend. His marriage had ended in a similar fashion, a bitter divorce where his wife's lawyers had tried to paint him as an emotionally vacant workaholic, a caricature he privately admitted was not entirely inaccurate. These experiences had calcified his heart, leaving him with a deep-seated cynicism. He saw the world as a transactional battlefield. People were either assets to be leveraged or liabilities to be managed. Trust was a fool's currency, and emotion was a dangerous vulnerability. He was efficient, brilliant, and utterly, achingly alone, a king in a silent, empty castle of his own making. Back in the superstore, Leo finished his grim accounting. He was short. He was 23 cents short for the smallest pack of diapers. A wave of cold shame washed over him. He could put them back, try a cheaper brand that he knew gave Lily a rash, or he could, what? There were no other options. He felt the weight of his failure pressing down on his chest, a physical and suffocating thing. He was a man who had once managed budgets in the millions, and now he couldn't afford the most basic necessity for his child. He closed his eyes for a brief second, a silent prayer or a curse escaping into the sterile air of the aisle. It was then that Julian acted. He strode forward, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the polished linoleum. He didn't speak to Leo. He simply plucked the box of diapers from Leo's hand, took another 10 boxes from the shelf, and then, in a move of pure, unadulterated power, swept the entire remaining stock into his oversized cart. He pushed the cart towards the checkout, his movements crisp and decisive, leaving Leo standing in the aisle, stunned and confused. Julian saw the cashier's bewildered expression as he began unloading dozens of diaper boxes. "I'll take all of these," Julian stated, his voice calm and authoritative. He pulled out a black, featureless credit card. As the cashier began the laborious process of scanning each box, Julian turned his head slightly. "The man in aisle 12, he said, not looking at the cashier but at some distant point beyond her. "Give him whatever he needs. Put it on this," he gestured vaguely with the card. It was not an act of kindness. It was an exercise in problem-solving. A messy, emotional situation was creating a bottleneck in his day, and he was eliminating it with the most efficient tool he possessed, money. He felt a grim satisfaction, the same he felt when closing a difficult deal. He had solved the problem. Leo, drawn by the commotion, approached the checkout just as the final box was scanned. He saw the mountain of diapers, the cashier's stunned face, and the impossibly well-dressed man signing a receipt. He felt a hot flush of humiliation. This wasn't charity, it was a spectacle. The man hadn't offered to help, he had simply erased Leo's struggle with an ostentatious display of wealth, treating him as an inconvenient piece of scenery to be managed. I can't accept this," Leo stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Julian turned to him, his eyes cool and appraising. It was the first time he had truly looked at him. He saw the worn-out clothes, the deep-set exhaustion, but also a flicker of something else in the man's eyes, a fierce, defiant pride. It was inconvenient. It's already done, Julian said dismissively. He turned to the cashier. Make sure he gets them. Without another word, he took his single bottle of Swiss water, left the mountain of paid-for diapers, and walked out of the store, the automatic doors sliding shut behind him like a judgment. Leo stood there, amidst a fortune in baby supplies, feeling smaller and more powerless than ever. The cashier, a kind-faced woman named Maria, slid a few boxes toward him. He said to take what you need, honey. Her voice was gentle, but it felt like a blow. Leo took 2 boxes, just enough to last the month. He couldn't bring himself to take more. As he walked home, carrying the boxes that felt heavier than they should, he wasn't filled with gratitude. He was filled with a burning, impotent rage. Julian, back in the quiet sanctuary of his car, found the encounter replaying in his mind. The man's eyes. That stubborn, foolish pride. It was illogical. Julian had provided a solution, and the man had reacted with resentment. It was inefficient. But it was also intriguing. On the receipt for his water, he noticed the store's loyalty program had printed the previous customer's first name and last initial from a scanned card, Leo V. It was nothing, a random data point. But Julian Croft's mind was built to analyze data points. On a whim, an uncharacteristic impulse he couldn't explain, he picked up his phone and sent a text to his head of security, a man who could find anyone and anything. Run a background check. Leo V was just at the Northside Megamart. Find him. The initial report came back within an hour. It was as thin and bleak as Julian had expected. Leo Vance. No current employment. A string of odd jobs, night stocking, dishwashing, data entry for a temp agency. Lived in a low-income housing block. No credit history to speak of. A widower. 1 infant daughter. It was the textbook profile of a man on the margins, exactly what Julian had assumed. He should have been satisfied. His initial assessment was correct. But the file felt incomplete. The pride in the man's eyes didn't match the data on the screen. Dig deeper, Julian texted back. 5 years ago. 10. I want his entire professional history. The second report arrived the next morning. Julian was sitting in his office on the 80th floor, the city spread out beneath him like a circuit board. When he opened the encrypted file, he felt a jolt, a genuine shock that was utterly foreign to him. The screen was filled with a different Leo Vance. A picture showed a younger man in a sharp suit, accepting an award on a brightly lit stage. There were articles from prestigious tech journals, patents filed under his name, links to keynote speeches he had given at international conferences. Dr. Leo Vance. The architect of Omnicorp's Helios system. A man once hailed as one of the most brilliant programmers of his generation. Julian kept reading, his coffee growing cold beside him. He found the news clippings about the whistleblowing scandal. He read the details of the data privacy breach, the subsequent corporate cover-up, and Leo's principled, career-destroying stand. He saw the timeline of the lawsuits, the public relations assault, the slow, methodical process by which a corporate behemoth had crushed a single man. Julian leaned back in his chair, the city lights below seeming to blur. He had not seen a man defined by his failures. He had seen a man defined by his integrity. He had stood in that store and passed judgment on a fallen king, a man who had chosen principle over profit, a choice Julian himself had never been forced to make, and one he was not sure he would have passed. The memory of his dismissive act, his grand, empty gesture, now burned with the acid of shame. Days later, the crisis hit. It arrived not with a bang, but with a quiet, terrifying string of corrupted data. Croft Innovations was on the verge of launching Nexus, a next-generation logistics platform that was set to revolutionize the global supply chain. It was Julian's magnum opus, the culmination of 5 years of work and hundreds of millions of dollars in investment. And it was breaking. A ghost in the machine, a subtle and malignant bug, was replicating itself deep within the system's core architecture. It didn't crash the system, it silently altered data, turning shipping manifests into gibberish, erasing inventory records, and rerouting phantom shipments to non-existent warehouses. It was a cancer, invisible and lethal. Julian's top engineers, led by his pragmatic and slightly arrogant chief technology officer, Marcus Vance, worked around the clock. They were the best in the business, handpicked by Julian himself. And they were failing. The bug was a phantom. It left no trace, its code was a masterpiece of destructive elegance, and it was buried so deep in the foundational layers of the system that every attempt to isolate it caused more damage. The launch was a week away. Failure was not an option. It would mean catastrophic financial loss, a shattered reputation, and the potential collapse of the company Julian had spent his life building. For 3 days, Julian watched his empire teeter on the brink. He saw the panic in the eyes of his best people. He saw Marcus, a man who had never admitted defeat, staring at a screen of cascading code with a look of utter bafflement. All of Julian's resources, his money, his power, were useless against this invisible enemy. He was facing a problem that could not be solved by conventional means. And in the depths of his desperation, a name surfaced in his mind. Leo Vance. The man who wrote code like poetry. The architect. The decision was agonizing. To ask for help was an admission of his own failure. To ask this specific man was an act of profound humility that felt like swallowing glass. He would have to go to that rundown apartment, stand before the man he had pitied and dismissed, and beg for his help. But the alternative was ruin. That evening, Julian's black sedan slid through the gritty, unfamiliar streets of the city's West End. He found the apartment building, its facade crumbling, and walked up 3 flights of stairs that smelled of damp and disinfectant. He knocked on the door of apartment 3B. Leo opened the door, holding Lily on his hip. He was wearing a faded t-shirt and sweatpants. He saw Julian Croft, and his face hardened. The quiet pride Julian had seen in the store was now a wall of cold steel. "What do you want?" Leo's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. Julian's carefully prepared speech, a transactional proposal of consultation fees and non-disclosure agreements, died on his lips. He looked at the man, at the baby in his arms, at the clean but bare apartment behind him, and for the first time in years, he chose honesty over strategy. "I need your help," Julian said, the words feeling foreign and heavy in his mouth. "My company is in trouble. We have a problem, a software problem, that no one can solve. I read about your work at Omnicorp. I know who you are." He paused, taking a breath. "And I was wrong. My behavior in the store, it was arrogant and insulting. I apologize." Leo stared at him, his expression unreadable. He had spent years dreaming of a moment like this, a chance for vindication. But now that it was here, he felt nothing but a deep, resonant weariness. He looked down at Lily, who was reaching a tiny hand out towards the stranger. "I don't do that work anymore," he said quietly. "I know what they did to you," Julian pressed, his desperation overriding his pride. "This is a chance to show them. To show everyone. Name your price." "Anything." Leo was silent for a long time. He wasn't thinking about the money, or the revenge. He was thinking about the diapers. About the look on Lily's face when she smiled. He had a duty to her, a duty that superseded his own wounded pride. He could fix this man's problem, and with the money, he could build a small, stable life for his daughter. It was a simple, pragmatic calculation. "I have one condition," Leo said finally. "She comes with me. I don't have a sitter." The sight of Leo Vance walking into the gleaming, glass and steel headquarters of Croft Innovations was a study in contrasts. He carried a simple diaper bag over one shoulder and held Lily, who was looking around with wide, curious eyes. He was led to the main conference room, the war room, where the company's top minds were gathered. The air was thick with tension and the smell of stale coffee. Marcus Vance, the CTO, looked Leo up and down with unconcealed skepticism. "This is him. This is the guy who's going to save us," he muttered to Julian, just loud enough for Leo to hear. Leo ignored him. He placed Lily in a portable playpen he had brought, setting it up in a corner of the room with a few of her favorite toys. Then he turned to the massive smartboard displaying streams of corrupted code. He didn't touch a keyboard. He simply stood and watched, his eyes scanning the cascading symbols. The other engineers talked in jargon, proposing complex patches and brute force attacks. Leo was silent. He asked for printouts of the core architecture, hundreds of pages of schematics and source code. He sat at the far end of the table, away from the frantic energy of the group, and began to read. For hours, he did nothing but read. He read the code not as a set of instructions for a machine, but as a language. He was looking for its grammar, its syntax, its soul. He saw the elegant design, but he also sensed a flaw in its philosophy. The system was designed for perfect, linear efficiency, but it had no tolerance for paradox, for the kind of recursive logic that could turn on itself. "It's not a bug," Leo said suddenly, his voice cutting through the tense murmur of the room. Everyone turned to look at him. "It's a feature. A perfectly designed piece of code doing exactly what it was built to do, just in a context the designers never anticipated." Marcus scoffed. "That's ridiculous. It's destroying our data." "It's not destroying it," Leo corrected, his voice calm and certain. "It's optimizing it." To 0-inch he walked to the board and, with a marker, drew a simple, elegant loop. He explained how a minor, overlooked subroutine designed to eliminate redundant data was interacting with the system's predictive algorithm. It had identified a pattern and, in its quest for ultimate efficiency, had logically concluded that the most optimized state for all future data was non-existence. It was trying to achieve a state of perfect, silent order. It was a digital ghost, born of flawed genius. He had found it. Not by outthinking the machine, but by empathizing with it. In less than 20 minutes, he wrote a small, 3-line patch. It wasn't a sledgehammer, it was a whisper. A simple command that taught the subroutine the concept of acceptable redundancy. He keyed it in, compiled it, and deployed it. The room held its breath. On the main diagnostic screen, the red flags of data corruption flickered, then one by one, they turned green. The system stabilized. The ghost was gone. A stunned silence fell over the room, broken only by the soft cooing of Lily in her playpen. Marcus Vance stared at the screen, then at Leo, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning respect. The so-called experts had been trying to fight a monster, but Leo had simply calmed a restless spirit. The next morning, Julian Croft called an emergency all-hands meeting. The entire company gathered in the vast, sunlit atrium. Julian stood on a raised platform, but he did not stand alone. He had asked Leo to stand with him. "Yesterday," Julian began, his voice resonating through the silent space, "this company was on the brink of collapse. Our greatest achievement, Nexus, was threatened by a problem our best and brightest could not solve." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "The man who saved it is standing beside me. His name is Leo Vance." Julian then did something no one expected. He didn't just thank Leo. He told them the whole story. He told them about Leo's brilliant career at Omnicorp, his reputation as a master architect. He told them about the ethical stand Leo had taken, the whistle he had blown to protect the privacy of millions. He told them how the industry had turned its back on him, how he had lost everything for doing the right thing. "I met Leo by chance last week," Julian continued, his voice thick with an emotion no one had ever heard from him before. "And I judged him. I saw his circumstances and I wrote him off. I was arrogant, and I was profoundly wrong. This man's integrity is as brilliant as his code. He saved this company not just with his skill, but by reminding us that true value isn't always found in a corner office or on a resume. Sometimes, it's found in quiet integrity, in the courage to stand for what is right, no matter the cost. He turned to Leo. Thank you. You have not only saved our company, you have given it a new standard to live up to. In his private office after the meeting, Julian made his offer. The CTO position is yours, Leo. Marcus has already tendered his resignation, though I refused it. I want you both. Name your salary. A 7-figure signing bonus. Equity. Whatever you want. Leo looked out the vast window at the city below. He saw the gleaming towers, the symbols of the world that had chewed him up and spit him out. He thought about the offer, the chance to reclaim everything he had lost. Then he looked at a picture of Lily he had on his phone. He shook his head slowly. I appreciate the offer, Julian. More than you know, he said, his voice soft but firm. But I can't go back to that world. I spent years building systems for corporations. I want to build something different now. He turned to face Julian. I have an idea. A foundation. Funded by a small percentage of Nexus's profits. We would build learning centers in underserved neighborhoods, like mine. We would teach kids to code, but more than that, we would teach them ethical design. We would teach them to build technology that serves communities, not just corporations. We would find the next generation of brilliant minds who would never otherwise get a chance. He called it the Nexus Foundation. Julian stared at him, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was a genuine smile, one that reached his eyes for the first time in years. This was better. This was more meaningful than any stock price or market share. Leo wasn't just offering to be an employee, he was offering a new purpose. A redemption. I accept, Julian said, extending his hand. Let's build it together. Partners. The next 2 years were a whirlwind of creation. The Nexus Foundation became a reality, with Leo as its director and Julian as its chairman. Their first center opened in a renovated warehouse in Leo's own neighborhood, a bright, vibrant space filled with state-of-the-art computers and walls covered in whiteboards. Leo was in his element, not as a manager, but as a teacher, a mentor. He had a preternatural ability to connect with the kids, to see the spark of genius in a shy teenager or the logical mind in a boisterous child. He wasn't just teaching them to code, he was teaching them to think, to solve problems, and to believe in their own worth. Julian, for his part, was a changed man. He threw himself into the foundation with the same relentless energy he had once reserved for his business. But this work filled the emptiness inside him. He found more satisfaction in seeing a scholarship student get into a top university than he ever had from closing a billion-dollar deal. He often visited the centers, not as the wealthy benefactor, but just as Julian. He would listen to the kids' project pitches, offer advice, and sometimes, he would just sit in the corner and watch Leo teach, marveling at the quiet genius of the man he had almost walked past in a grocery store. Marcus Vance, the once skeptical CTO, became one of the Foundation's most dedicated volunteers, teaching advanced programming classes every Saturday. He and Leo had formed an unlikely friendship, built on a deep mutual respect for each other's talents. The company culture at Croft Innovations began to shift as well, with a new emphasis on ethical practices and community outreach, all driven by Julian's new perspective. One crisp autumn afternoon, 2 years after their first meeting, Julian and Leo stood on the rooftop of their newly opened second center, a gleaming facility overlooking a park. Lily, now a talkative toddler, was running in circles around them, her laughter echoing in the clear air. Look at all this, Julian said, gesturing to the vibrant community below. I spent my whole life building an empire of things, of assets. I thought that was what it meant to be wealthy. He looked at Leo, his expression one of profound gratitude. I thought I was doing you a favor that day, buying you diapers. I was so arrogant. The truth is, I was the one who was poor. You showed me what real wealth is. Leo smiled, picking up Lily and settling her on his hip. Well, he said, a gentle humor in his voice, to be fair, I really did need the diapers. They both laughed, a warm and easy sound that floated out over the city. It was the sound of a partnership built not on contracts and transactions, but on mutual respect and a shared purpose. Down below, the lights of the center flickered on, a beacon of hope in a neighborhood that had seen too little of it. It was a testament to the profound and simple truth that a person's worth is not measured by their station in life, but by the content of their character, and that sometimes, the most extraordinary futures are built from the most ordinary of beginnings.